In this video, we'll consider a third much more realistic market model, one that is a combination of both pure competition and pure monopoly. We can call it monopolistic competition. Like pure competition, the monopolistically competitive model is characterized by many sellers, with no barriers to entry into the industry. But, unlike pure competition, the products produced by firms in the monopolistically competitive industry are not homogeneous. The consumers consider them substantially differentiated, one from another, at least, to the degree that they are no longer indifferent as to their source of purchase. This preference of one brand over another may be due to actual physical or some other kinds of differences between the products. Or, it could be that the differences are really just imagined by the consumer. It doesn't matter which reason accounts for the consumer's preferences of brand. Which brand of BBs do you prefer? You're probably indifferent because BBs are homogeneous. If I handed one to you, you couldn't tell which brand it was. But, it's almost certain that you have a preference for one brand of sneakers over another. Or, one type of fast food. Let's start our analysis of the monopolistically competitive model with the cost curves. We are very familiar by now with the cost relationships. They are standard for all firms, across all industries. But what do the revenue relationships look like? As you know, all revenue relationships are derived from the demand curve. The demand curve for the monopolistically competitive firm, like that for the pure monopolist, will be downward sloping. Even though there are many sellers in the industry, the products are not perfect substitutes for each other. If a seller were to raise the price of its product, for example, he would lose some of his customers, but, unlike the seller in a purely competitive industry, he would not lose all of them. Because the products are differentiated, some consumers would be willing to pay the higher price, rather than switch to a different brand. And, as you know, the demand curve is also the average revenue curve. As we saw in developing the revenue relationships for the pure monopolist, when it is downward sloping, the marginal revenue curve will lie below and slant steeper than the demand curve. Now let's view the revenue relationships and cost relationships on the same graph so we can do some analysis. Remember, the revenue relationships and the cost relationships are independent of each other. So there is no particular placement of the cost curves relative to the revenue curves. Therefore, for analysis purposes, we can just draw the cost curves on the graph anywhere we want. Given this placement of the cost and revenue curves, here is where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. So, here is the profit maximizing quantity that this particular firm will produce. And, if we draw the dotted line all the way up to the demand curve, we see that this is the profit maximizing price this firm will charge. It's the profit maximizing price because it is the highest price the firm can charge and still sell the profit maximizing quantity. With this profit maximizing price quantity combination, is this firm actually making an economic profit? The answer is yes, because at this level of output, average revenue exceeds average total cost. Up to this point, our graph looks exactly like that of a pure monopolist. But here is the big difference. Because there are no barriers to entry into a monopolistically competitive industry, other entrepreneurs will guide resources into this market, chasing those economic profits. With more firms now in this industry, the existing customer base must be shared among a greater number of firms. This particular firm, and all the others, will each therefore get a smaller share of total industry sales, thus causing its demand curve to shift to the left. Let's let these green curves represent the new placement of these revenue relationships now that this firm is getting a smaller share of the total market. Take a careful look at this graph and make sure you understand why this is the new price-quantity combination for our sample firm. Pause the video if you need to. Given this leftward shift in the demand curve, is this firm now making an economic profit? If we compare average revenue to average total cost, we see that cost is greater than revenue. This firm is not making an economic profit. In fact, it's making an economic loss. Keep in mind though that the entrepreneur may still be making accounting profits. An economic loss, as we see here, simply means that the entrepreneur is making less in this industry than he would make at his next best opportunity. So, don't worry too much. He's probably still able to put food on the table for his family, but he won't be leaving the industry yet. Shutting down this firm, in other words, producing 0 units of output, would cause him to lose even more. That's because, in this graph, his average revenue is still covering his average variable cost. The entrepreneur will use this surplus to take a bite out of his fixed cost expenses, to which he's contractually obligated, irrespective of the number of units produced. He'll just wait for others to leave, which they will do eventually as their fixed cost obligations expire. As they do, the demand curve for the firms remaining in the industry will shift back to the right. Because there are now fewer firms in the industry, each, hypothetically, will get a larger customer base. As in the case of pure competition, where there were also no barriers to entry, equilibrium will settle out at the point where there are 0 economic profits. The existence of economic profits cause entry by other firms, causing those profits to go down. The existence of economic losses cause firms to leave, causing profits to go back up. In equilibrium, therefore, the profit maximizing quantity will be that at which the average revenue curve is just tangent to the average total cost curve. And therefore, economic profits are 0. This of course means that the entrepreneur's accounting profits are equal to that which he would make at his next best opportunity. In other words, this firm and all the others in the industry are making exactly normal profits. As a result, there will be no further entry into, or exit from, the industry. This monopolistically competitive industry is now therefore in equilibrium. Now that we know what equilibrium looks like, let's consider the efficiency implications of monopolistic competition. Let's start with allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency, as you know, is achieved when price and marginal cost are equal at equilibrium. Notice here though, at equilibrium, price is greater than marginal cost. Through the price mechanism, where industries get its signals, society is saying, give us more of this product and less of the alternative product that could have been produced with the same resources. However, the monopolistically competitive industry will not produce more units of this product because a higher supply would lead to economic losses. As a result, resources are being underallocated into this industry. A less than socially optimal amount of this product is being produced. Productive efficiency occurs when the firm is producing at the lowest point on its average total cost curve. It indicates that the firm is using its facilities and resources in the most productive way. In the monopolistically competitive equilibrium, firms are not producing at the minimum ATC. It is the underallocation of resources into the industry that prevents the firm from making the full use of its productive facilities. And finally, let's consider distributive efficiency. As you can see, the entrepreneur is making 0 economic profits at equilibrium. The many sellers feature of the model, coupled with no barriers to entry, result in all economic profits being competed away. As a result, the entrepreneur is making accounting profits that are equal to that which he would earn at his next best opportunity, as determined by the free market. The entrepreneur is neither being overpaid nor underpaid at equilibrium. This would conclude our analysis of the monopolistically competitive market model. But, there is one more feature of monopolistic competition that adds to its inefficiency that we need to consider at this point. It comes as no surprise that monopolistically competitive firms rely heavily on advertising to differentiate their product. Although there are many ways in which advertising can be categorized, let's divide the types of advertising done by monopolistically competitive firms into two basic types. We'll call these categories informative and persuasive. Informative advertising provides the consumer with information that he would otherwise have to discover on his own, such as prices, availability, locations, warranties, quality, etc. This could be expensive and time-consuming. Informative advertising would therefore save the consumer the cost of searching out information, and would therefore contribute to economic efficiency. Here is an example of an ad that compares information of two brands of beer. This information might be used to help consumers decide which product is preferable to them, and therefore allows them to make a more rational choice as to how to use their money. Persuasive advertising, on the other hand, is designed to simply reallocate customers among firms in the industry, simply by creating a perception that one product is better or otherwise substantially differentiated from the other. Here is an example of an ad that was very popular in the 1990s, the Budweiser Frogs. The ad provided no information about the product whatsoever. The ad campaign started out as three frogs, sitting on lily pads in a swamp, croaking out the name, Bud, Wise, Er. It became very popular, and many subsequent ads for Budweiser beer were variations on this theme. But it was not intended to save the consumer the cost of searching out information. It was strictly intended to establish a connection and make the consumer feel good about the product, and redistribute consumers of beer from other producers. The purpose of persuasive advertising is not necessarily to attract new customers into the industry, but rather to steal the customers from other companies without having to engage in mutually destructive price warfare. Persuasive advertising utilizes some of society's scarce resources and adds another layer of cost to the firm, but does not save anyone any time or money, make the production process more efficient, or otherwise add to the stock of material wealth produced by society. Here is a monopolistically competitive firm in equilibrium, as we derived a little bit earlier. What would happen on this graph if the firm engaged in a campaign of persuasive advertising in order to attract buyers from other firms in the industry? The intent of the campaign, of course, is to shift the firm's demand curve to the right. Ideally, it would shift far enough to the right to more than compensate for the increased costs to the firm. Take a moment to analyze this graph. Just kidding. Let's get rid of our old set of curves and examine the new set, post-ad campaign. Was this firm's campaign ad successful? Here's the new point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Here then is the new profit maximizing quantity and the new profit maximizing price. The firm is now making economic profits by virtue of the fact that average revenue now exceeds average total cost at the profit maximizing level of output. Indeed, the ad campaign was a success, but these economic profits are only temporary, as the other firms in the industry will launch their own advertising campaigns to get their customers back, and otherwise protect their customer base. Before too long, as the other firms recapture their customers with their own ad campaigns, the economic profits are again eaten away. There are two basic differences between the former equilibrium and this one. First, there is an extra layer of cost. Second, each firm produces more because there are fewer firms in the industry. Some had to drop out either because their ad campaigns were not successful, or because they couldn't absorb the extra cost of advertising, and therefore could not recapture their customers. But, look what it's done to the product price. Consumers are paying more for the product than they did before this advertising war, which accomplished nothing. It seems like a waste of time, resources and money. You might ask, why don't the firms just stop advertising? It seems a waste of money because all it accomplished was to add an extra layer of costs. and all the firms just wound up in the same place as before, zero economic profits. The problem is, though, that the firms are now entrapped in a prisoner's dilemma game where ending their spending on advertising is not an option. At this point, you may want to refer back to Module 2 to refresh your memory of the game theory model called the prisoner's dilemma. The remainder of this lesson assumes that you are up to speed with the prisoner's dilemma. We will start with our basic two-player game theory payoff matrix. We'll use the two-player game, firms A and B, despite the fact that a monopolistically competitive industry has many sellers. In this way, we can just use the payoff matrix rather than a system of simultaneous equations. Even though the basic premise has been simplified by this model, the conclusions will be just as valid. Remember, the values that go to firm B go above the diagonal line, and the values that go to firm A go below it. Assume that the profits earned by each firm is $1,000 per period. However, if one firm advertises and the other does not, it can capture 50% of the other firm's customers. The other firm can prevent this from happening by advertising itself. Advertising costs $200. The choices that each firm faces is to advertise or not advertise. If each firm chooses not to advertise, they will each receive their $1,000 profit. Now, let firm A advertise, and firm B does not. Firm B will lose half of its customer base, reducing its profits from $1,000 to $500. Firm A, on the other hand, will get those customers from firm B. After subtracting advertising expenses, its profits are now $1,300. That's $1,000, which was its original profit, plus the $500 from firm B, minus the $200 cost of advertising. Now let's examine the opposite case. Firm B advertises, stealing half of firm A's customer base, but firm A does not advertise. Look at these numbers for a moment. Pause the video if you need to. Make sure you understand these numbers. Now consider the case where both firms advertise. Neither enjoys a net advantage over the other, but they still must pay the $200 for advertising. For each firm, their profits are therefore $1,000 minus $200, resulting in each receiving $800. Now that we've filled in all the values, we can determine the equilibrium outcome. First, let's consider firm B. If firm A advertises, should firm B advertise or not advertise? Clearly, advertising would be the better choice in this case. 800 beats 500. So, if firm A advertises, firm B will advertise. But what if firm A does not advertise? Again, firm B is better off by advertising. Therefore, irrespective of firm A's strategy, firm B will advertise. Recall from the section on the prisoner's dilemma game, and Module 2. This is known as firm B's dominant strategy. Now let's consider firm A. What if firm B does not advertise? Will firm A be better off by advertising or not advertising? Obviously, by advertising. 1,300 beats 1,000. Firm A will then choose to advertise. 800 beats 500. Advertising is firm A's dominant strategy as well. Advertising is both firms' dominant strategy. Neither dare stop advertising to try to save some money and lower the product price, as it would result in a loss of customers, and thus lower profit. You can see this in many industries in real life. Whether it's car insurance, fast food, non-prescription medicines, makeup, clothes or automobiles. Advertising is characteristic of a monopolistically competitive industry. Are they getting ahead? Or just keeping up?